We made it.
We made it.
And we're back to being live, which I like.
I do. I like that so much better.
Yeah. You get the energy and the vibes of just being with you.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that.
I do too. Also, I just don't like recording things online. It's just like there's too much to think about, and I see myself, and I don't like that.
Mm-mm.
And I have to pay attention to all the things, and I have to set up the tech stuff on my end instead of you doing all the work. And I like when you do all the tech work better.
Oh, yes. Introductions.
Mm-hmm. I'm Laurel. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a mental health educator.
And I'm Juniper, also a licensed clinical social worker and mental health educator. And we are mental health educators together. And I enjoy educating with you. Mental health educating.
Here we are, mental health educating. What are we talking about today?
Well, this is something that has been a long time coming, I think, for this podcast, but also just in general, because it's on the tip of everyone's tongue because November is fast approaching.
Oh, gosh.
It's presidential election season, and I'm already feeling anxious. There's just that low-level anxiety that's there all the time.
All right, so talking about all this, maybe all this political talk has you a little bit stressed out. It can be really stressful.
I'd say my stress level's a little bit higher than my friends because I care a lot about humanity.
One national survey finds a majority of Americans are stressed about election season.
And I'm scared. My stomach hurts every day. I have insomnia, never had it in my life, for this election.
I've got a ton of anxiety. I'm very nervous, but I'm optimistic.
The American people are frustrated.
Economically and the cultural wars, and that fear turns into a kind of depression.
Today we're talking about politics and therapy, politics in therapy, politics affecting mental health. What's our official title here?
All of those things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're all come together.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know. Someone comment and suggest a perfect title for this episode because I've told people over and over again for many years that being short-winded is not my strong suit.
Absolutely.
So that includes coming up with like pithy titles.
Well, and I think that what we're going to see is that it pervades all aspects of human and other than human life.
Right.
And so I think it's really hard to narrow that down. But I think today what we're going to focus on, since we are mental health educators, is the mental health aspects not only of clients, but of clinicians. So right. Politics in the therapy room, but also politics in the personal.
And we're going to, I think, start with the personal, and then we'll move flow, if you will, into the therapy space because it'll give us a good foundation, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. I think as we do draw closer to, in the United States, the presidential election, it's becoming more of a topic for a lot of people, including my clients. And I'm sure other people's clients as well, right? Because if we're feeling it, I mean, I'm a client of therapy. I'm not just a therapist. And so, of course, other people are feeling it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get more into what people are feeling.
Yeah. So,
and how many people are feeling it.
I know. So I just started with the APA, right? The American Psychological Association. I was like, what do they have on that? And they do, as you also noticed, have quite a bit of content around this. And they've done some really interesting studies. And so I focused on an article that was kind of condensing some of this information and these studies and kind of like, it's almost like a meta analysis in a like an informal way.
Yeah.
It's the impact of election stress is political anxiety harming your health, right? And this is from this summer, July 23rd. So it's pretty recent. And it starts off talking about a Pew poll. So it's really interesting, this language that they use. It says, in a deeply negative snapshot of American politics. I loved that. Deeply negative. Of February 2024, so pretty recently, Pew poll found that 65% of U.S. adults always or often felt exhausted by politics, and 55% always or often felt angry. So that's over half of U.S. adults that participated in this poll. And Pew Research is a huge, I mean, they are the poll people, right? And so we can receive that as pretty accurate. And, what they have found looking through all of these other studies beyond that Pew poll is that political anxiety and stress really harms or can harm both our physical and our psychological well-being and our emotional well-being, right? So it can turn into it is for some people chronic stress, and we know that the presence of chronic stress in our body over time can be really traumatic to our system and damaging to our system. And so there are a lot of real consequences of this. It's not just being like stressed out and anxious, right? It's losing sleep, shortened temper, obsessive thoughts, emotional reactivity, damaged relationships, being hyper-focused on social media. Across 3 separate surveys, 1 in 20 people also reported being so distressed about politics that they had thoughts of suicide.
73% of American adults say they feel anxiety regarding the 2024 election. But it's not just the election. Current events, the economy, gun violence, climate change, things that are also typically discussed during election season are also causing many Americans to feel increasingly stressed.
We have our co-host Zulu coming in.
Zulu.
So if y'all hear any pitter patter, that's our friend who is not stressed out by politics right now.
No, she seems pretty chill.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to say? No? Okay, cool. So this is really not only very prevalent in our social location, especially right now, but it is really affecting people on a day-to-day real basis. Like
Yes.
they are feeling it in their body. They're experiencing differences in their ability to cope and manage how they feel and their relationships and all of this. I thought it was also interesting. They noted in this article that young, politically engaged or left-leaning folks tend to experience higher levels of political anxiety, which we can talk about maybe why, and I'm sure you'll get into that. That social connection can make a difference, but only with bonding ties or bonds between people who are politically similar. So that can help, but bridging ties with folks who have dissimilar political stances or beliefs were actually associated with worse overall health for people, which is a really interesting juxtaposition that I'm going to come back to because it kind of pushes against some of this other advice that I found about how to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go there too. Another researcher even has coined a term that they refer to as election stress disorder.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in the DSM, but it's a specific, significant, and unique set of symptoms that this researcher is coining as a new disorder.
Interesting. Well, yeah, I've seen stuff on political stress, political anxiety, political depression, political despair. I've seen a lot of those terms. Yeah, I found a lot of the same statistics that you found. I think we probably read a lot of the same things. I looked at the Journal of Clinical Psychology. We do know that there is a very specific and particular style of stress happening now that's different than 2016.
Right.
I did find some differences about people's responses, including the polarization and partisan identity after 2016 has been reported as higher. And I think we can guess, we can make some guesses why.
I don't even think we need to guess. Do we? Can we
Yeah.
just call it for what it is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was,
it was Trump.
The Donald Trump election.
Yeah.
It really changed politics in a lot of ways because the MAGA style is so different. And we're going to get all into that. We got a lot of information from, you said, the APA. So they do a Stress in America poll.
Yeah.
And they put it out either annually or biannually. I think it's annually. The survey measures attitudes and perception of stress among the general public. And guess what the last one was titled? A Nation Recovering from Collective Trauma.
Okay, well, that's fair.
Yeah. I get shivers thinking about it because this is what tends to happen with trauma and collective trauma and really difficult things, especially when we're in a constantly progressing culture. We've moved on from that. But 2016 to 2022, there was a lot of collective trauma with the global pandemic.
Gosh.
Because as we know, during the pandemic, politics changed.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It was like insidious because every act became political. Most acts became political, and not just during the pandemic, but also the social justice movements that were happening around.
Yeah. I mean, it was wild. I think before that, a lot of people probably who had been a product of various privileges had been used to separating out politics like so significantly, right? Like it was just something that like happened when you went to vote just for one day, or like when you happened to turn on the news. And I think 2020 and moving forward, but for sure 2020 was this catalyst for a lot of people to recognize that, I mean, it was like insidious and pervasive, but like to recognize that maybe it was always like that, and we've just done a really good job of compartmentalizing it. And not everybody has had that experience. I think again that's like a product of privilege, but I think for a lot of people it was very jarring to have all of these like realizations how politics has its hand in everything.
Right? There's a lot of different ways that people have engaged in the political realm, whether it be as a person being oppressed by the political realm, as a person being active, as far as wanting to engage civically or democratically. But I think adding in what happened during that time period, I think is going to amp up the emotional reactivity. And I kind of want to get into why that happened, but I want to make sure that we talked about all the factors that are involved with that. And I believe that is a huge factor. The thing that I noticed it coming out the most in was mask wearing.
Oh my god.
That was just
that is so triggering. I can't even think about it right now.
I know. Yeah. It became mask wearing not only became moral, it's such a very clear distinction of we feel differently of what our morals are here. And so I think there was a lot of pipelines that were bringing people to these radical spaces. And radical isn't always bad.
No.
But in some cases, it was gearing people toward white supremacy or gearing people toward the manosphere. That got really big during that time. Or gearing people toward all of these different anti-vaccine. That was a huge thing. And then not even to talk about the entire history of the United States.
Right.
But I think that those recent events are really fueling it right now.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. What comes up for you when I say that?
Well, I think it's probably a complicated or like complex puzzle, right? At some point, rather than resisting it and being like, I don't like this because this is not how it used to be, so many of us are just like, well, this is how it is now. And so we don't notice it maybe as consciously, even though it's still there. I think we're just like in it. We're like in the shift rather than resisting the shift, even though it's still present and the changes are still affecting us. But also the polarization is so much more extreme and so much more salient. Like you can see it, you can hear it in people's voices, whereas before it was quieter, and now people are saying the quiet part out loud.
You know, I'm just gonna say the quiet part out loud.
And let's talk about some of the reasons why this political anxiety, political stress, discomfort, despair is different than maybe other forms of anxiety or stress. Or we can just talk about this very specific brand. The 4 that I boiled it down to based on what kept coming up a lot was fear, anger, moral outrage, and appeals to in-group loyalty.
Right.
Those were the top 4. Makes total sense.
Totally.
I feel it inside my body. And I was reading that these techniques aren't just designed to inform you.
No.
Right? They're strategically crafted
of course,
to provoke a reaction that keeps you engaged, drives media consumption, and compels you to support a particular agenda.
Right.
And when you talked about that threat to safety, obviously fear is one of those. It just really appeals to your personal safety. But I think with the political style of fear, not just your personal safety, but your family, your neighborhood, your state, your country. That's huge fear. And it's more so than typical because all politicians use that strategy.
Of course.
Right? On all sides. Inciting anger is highly effective for emotional manipulation.
It's highly effective for me.
Yes, exactly. It's probably my number one.
Yeah.
We live in a world now where there is an economic model that strongly incentivizes online platforms like Facebook, Google, Twitter to capture as much of our attention as possible. The way to do that is to promote content that is the most engaging. And what is the most engaging? Moral content. And so that means that the algorithms that select for what is shown to all of us in our news feeds are selecting for the content that's going to be the most engaging, because that draws the most attention, because that creates the most revenue through ad sales for these companies. This suggests that the kinds of stories that we read in our news feeds online might be artificially inflated in terms of how much outrage they provoke. Immoral events that people learn about online trigger more outrage than immoral events that they learn about in person or through traditional forms of media like TV, newspaper, and radio. So this supports the idea that the algorithms that drive the presentation of news content online are selecting that content that provokes perhaps higher levels of outrage than we even see on the news, and of course what we see normally in our daily lives. One possibility that has been floated in the news recently is outrage fatigue, and I think many of us can relate to the idea that if you're constantly feeling outraged, it's exhausting, and there may be a limit to how much outrage we're able to experience day to day. That is potentially harmful in terms of the long-term social consequences, because if we are feeling outraged about relatively minor things, and that's depleting some kind of reserve, that may mean that we're not able to feel outraged for things that really matter.
Anger is an emotion that's important.
Of course.
Yeah, it shows us things like that there's injustices or that a personal boundary is being violated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a smart one, but it's often used in ways that are inflated and full of misinformation.
Well, yeah, I think that's the tricky part. It's not that anger itself is bad. It's just is. It's information, like you said. But it's when someone is able to use and manipulate and create more extreme anger in people, very often through conspiracy theories and misinformation. If you can get people really pissed off, you can make a whole lot of money.
Right.
If you can then say, well, I hear that you're angry and I'm going to fix that for you. Right.
It's an effective strategy
Yeah.
to get things done,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what anger is. I find that to be an emotion or a feeling state that drives action.
Right.
And so it can be really effective that way.
Mm-hmm.
But as we've seen, it can also be effective in doing a lot of damage with families, social groups, and in a wider instance, creating hostile environments that are unsafe for a lot of people.
Yeah.
That goes along with the in-group morality,
Mm-hmm.
which again just reinforces a sense of belonging or even superiority, making it easier to dismiss differing perspectives.
People may harm those whom they perceive to be in an out-group in ways they would not harm in-group members. For example, one study showed that when soccer fans viewed fans of their own team being harmed, they felt empathy. But when they viewed fans of a rival team being similarly harmed, they felt pleasure. Likewise, people tend to make different moral judgments based on in-group and out-group distinctions. When someone in our in-group misbehaves, the natural reaction is often to dismiss the behavior as no big deal. But when someone in our out-group does the same thing, we will tend to judge the behavior much more harshly. Indeed, when automatic in-group and out-group distinctions replace conscious and thoughtful reflection, we are more likely to harm one another and behave unethically.
And I've noticed myself doing it. And I really got to check myself before I wreck myself, because that is a natural tendency, but also can obviously be problematic.
Right.
In many ways.
Yeah.
Because all humans are worthy, and other than humans are worthy of respect.
Yeah, of course.
Well, all.
All. Yeah, let's go with all for now.
Okay. I'm playing. And then last but not least, the moral framing. So using moral language to make issues feel like ethical imperatives rather than debatable points. This one for me feels huge.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Oh, for sure. We could do a whole episode just on that.
Yeah.
The languaging of like, not just, oh, here's how I feel about something or here's what I believe about something, but here is the way it is. It does get into this really interesting concept. It's moral relativism versus like objective truth, and saying that something is an objective truth when maybe it's not can be really dangerous, powerful tool. And a lot of people are using that nowadays.
Absolutely. That's the other thing, personality wise, we talk about all these negative effects, but I don't know if you read this in research, but there's positive effects. Obviously from being part of an in-group or going to these rallies and feeling joy, feeling connection. And some people's personalities are like, debate, bring it on.
Sure.
But what I was thinking over the last couple of decades is, again, these felt like debatable points. It felt less like an attack on my morality or who I am as a person, rather than we're debating on these particular topics, but it doesn't really affect who we are as people. Right. We can still see each other and respect each other. I feel like that actually has shifted.
Oh yeah, I agree.
At least in my closer connections where we do have polar opposite beliefs in a lot of ways. And we're going to talk more about that. But you want to hear an interesting term that I saw come up?
I do.
Affective polarization. It's where the emotional distance between groups increase, causing individuals to not only disagree with the opposing side, but also actively dislike or distrust them. So that's something that I was talking about earlier.
Right.
So the stronger the partisan identity, the stronger the emotional reactions.
Right. Yeah.
And so I just wanted to kind of bring some of these pieces in because it's leading to things like reduced empathy, increased hostility, confirmation bias, in-group favoritism, social sorting, so choosing friends, partners, neighborhoods that align with your political beliefs.
It's really interesting because I think before times, during precedented times, my personality is not to debate. My personality tends to be more of like, okay, guys, like, let's have harmony, right? And so in precedented times, I would have been like, oh, that's terrible. Can't we find a middle ground? And it doesn't mean that there's not value in seeing nuance, because I also really think that's important. And I have a lot of conversations every day about living in the gray. That sounds really awful and heavy and dark and challenging. And is that the only way to like move things forward sometimes, is to have really hard, painful emotions? And I'm not saying that that's all good either. I guess it's just like now I'm a little bit more like, okay, well, if I'm really angry about something, maybe that's a good thing. And maybe it's not all about like holding hands all the time. It's like, where is the line? I actually have a harder time with that now. Before I would have been like, yeah, let's find a middle ground. And now I really have a harder time. I go back and forth a lot about like, what's the value in either of those things?
Right. And I agree with you. And so does a lot of social scientists and researchers. And we're going to get into that when we talk about techniques or ideas, because it's not about suppressing that.
Right.
It's about understanding it and being able to have a lot of awareness around what maybe is inflated.
Right. Sure.
And what is important. Not engaging is not the answer.
Well, oh yeah, for sure.
And in my view, and a lot of other people's views, but I agree with you. And I think that that's what ends up happening is these are all very important parts of the human experience in a social environment, right? And some of this, I believe a lot of people are being manipulated. That's what happens with propaganda. And so you don't get to have that clear view of the injustices. That's my opinion. I think it gets very hazy because a lot of our biological stuff comes online and it's like, must fight for my, safety and security.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I do think it can lend to behavior that people regret on social media or taking action that isn't fully helpful to meeting your needs of oppression or what have you. Does that make sense?
Oh, of course. It is hard to figure out where the line is and how you act on things and which things you act on and which things you pay attention to when so much of the information you're receiving is not even being put out in good faith.
There's one book that I was recommended to by This Is Mallory, an account that I follow on Instagram. Yeah. It's called The Death of Truth by Stephen Brill. It's pretty good.
That sounds dark.
But
I'm not opposed to that. It just sounds really dark.
This is one of the best books I've read in a long time. It's called What the Fact by Seema Yasmin. Have you heard of it?
No.
What the Fact. Oh my God, it's so good.
Okay.
Oopsies. I just turned it on. But yeah. And that one really helped me to get the sense of like how media operates and how propaganda works. One of the things that I found was if it's appealing to emotions, most likely there's some thread of some type of manipulation happening. And I'm going to use the word manipulation because I feel that's what it is. I don't think manipulation's always bad. We all do it in our own ways. You just want to have your eyes and ears open to the information you're being presented to.
Right.
Especially like with headlines. So we're going to get all into that. You want to go to some of the ways to talk about I love the way you framed it.
Oh, like the tips? Yeah. Let's talk about how we deal with this. Yeah. I think it's a hard thing to deal with, right? Like it's painful, it's scary. And so talking about the statistics and like the theory of it and all of that, I think it's helpful to have a foundation, but then what do we do with it? And so as we were prepping for this, and I know like you had kind of looked up a couple things too, but I try to look and see what was out there as far as like advice. Because okay, so we have this article like, oh, everybody's sad, everybody's angry, everybody's anxious, and it's an election, and fuck you. Like, I mean,
right?
Like, what do we do? And so much of that work as a therapist or as a mental health professional is sitting across from someone who's like, I'm feeling this way. What do I do? And it doesn't mean that we have the exact answer, but of course, like that's where my brain goes. I'm like, well, what do we do about that? So I looked up some different tips that other people have put out there and offered. And I kind of broke them down into two categories: political stress advice that annoys me and political stress advice that doesn't annoy me.
Thing number one I'm watching absolutely no news.
Number 2, limit your time on social media.
First of all, limit your exposure to news and social media. Slow down, calm down, have informed and productive conversations.
Stop imagining the worst possible outcome.
Tip number 1, get a restful night's sleep.
I find that the best remedy for concern about elections is to get involved.
Instead of dwelling on differences, discuss the values that you share.
There are things you can do to feel better. Thinking about upcoming holidays or engaging in hobbies can be a good way of distracting yourself.
Would really be putting down phone, the iPad, technology. Try something new or something you haven't done before. Don't avoid or withdraw, and offer compassion and understanding to others.
Take care of yourself. Make sure you're getting the sleep that you need. Make sure that you're eating in a healthy way. You're not emotionally eating. And exercise. Move your body.
Psychiatrists say you can ease election stress by limiting exposure. Take a break from all things related to the election. Keep up a healthy routine. And finally, seek help, either from friends or family or a mental health professional.
And I will say, you may hear some slight overlap in the advice that annoys me and the advice that does not annoy me, and I'm going to explain why, so hang tight. Okay. But overall, the advice that annoyed me the most was more general, and it spoke to sort of what you were saying earlier of how like this experience of like political stress and anxiety is not the same as just like general anxiety. And so a lot of the advice that annoys me seems to be advice that everybody gets around like how to manage anxiety generally. Okay, so for example, a couple of things I found on Instagram. Limit your social media and news.
That one, that's on my number one.
Why is that a piece of advice that anyone gives anyone?
Yeah.
About managing this.
Limit your social media. And it's like,
limit your social media and like how?
Yeah. Number one, how?
How would I do that?
Number two, why? How is that helpful? I'd like a little bit more explanation.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, you just get the one sentence in a bullet point.
Mm-hmm. That's all. That's literally all it said.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, okay. Also, like, what? I don't know. Like, how am I supposed to do that? I mean, I'm sure there are ways, which we can talk about, but how am I supposed to do that? It's literally everywhere all around me.
Social media is very unlikely to go away because it taps into the things that we find most rewarding. Connection with others, expressing our moral values, sharing those moral values with others, building our reputation. And of course, what makes social media so compelling and so addictive even is the fact that these platforms are really tapping into very ancient neural circuitries that we know are involved in reward processing.
Hearing that advice for a lot of people just feels like defeating because social media and news are just like pervasive everywhere. Okay, so the next one, acknowledge your feelings. That is literally a piece of advice that I saw listed in response to feeling stressed about election season.
That is super helpful. I mean, it's not wrong necessarily.
No, I'm not saying it's advice that's wrong. It just annoys me. That's why I titled it as such.
Yeah.
It's annoying to me. Like, sure, shouldn't we always practice acknowledging our feelings? That's sort of like a life hack.
Yeah.
If you will. Maintain your routine.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
What does
I don't know.
mean?
What does that mean? Because in many cases, people are fearful because your routine ain't gonna be your routine anymore.
100%.
I mean, like literally people are scared, understandably, that their routine is not just going to be disrupted in an annoying way, but in like a damaging way.
How do you tell someone who happens to be a Haitian resident of Springfield, Ohio, to just go about your daily routine while you're getting death and bomb threats?
Right, exactly. Go about your daily routine.
Example.
Just send your kids to school, even though someone said they're going to bomb the school.
It's like,
no problem. Maintain your routine.
Yeah. Oh,
a terrible piece of advice. Nobody listened to that.
Yeah. I understand the reasoning behind it because we understand the body's like routines and it helps us to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not safe.
I know.
We're not safe. Okay. What's your next one?
I promise I'm almost done with this one. And then you can share yours if you have any others. Recognize your limits.
Okay. What?
Do we see a pattern here? It's just, sure. How does recognizing my limits help me in any way? Yeah, my limit. I have literally reached my limit. I have had so many moments over the past several years where I'm like, I have reached my capacity, my limit. And yet, does that change what I have to do? Does that change my responsibilities? Does that change the things that are happening all around me? Sure doesn't.
I'm wondering if like the author of this post, this general post, was thinking that there's like a switch that you could be like, I met my limit. I'm just going to boop, turn the light out and be done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know.
I want to hear the next one.
Reduce work goals and increase your self-care. I'm sorry. How am I supposed to just reduce my work goals? I'm so sorry. I'm feeling anxious about political things right now. I just can't work. Like that is, I mean, if only that were an option.
Yeah.
Sure. I'm sure that actually people would be much less stressed and anxious if they could just have more vacation time. Right. That would be awesome. And I actually do believe that. That's actually not facetious. Like I believe that many people's problems would be solved if I could give them 4 weeks of vacation and $10,000.
Yes.
At least for, a short time.
Right.
That might mitigate some of their symptoms.
Yes.
But yeah, like telling a person to reduce their work goals and increase their self-care as the advice is wild.
I've
to
never
me.
even seen that
That is
one.
unhinged.
I've seen engage in self-care and then nothing else. And
Nothing
that's
else.
another irritation.
Yeah.
Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Today, the term self-care has become removed from its origins based on Audre Lorde's experience as a Black feminist lesbian who found care in the richness of her relationships and her work. Self-care has been watered down, repackaged, and sold to us by corporations looking to cash in on our desire to better ourselves.
What does that mean? What is that doing?
Yeah.
And let's just go ahead and say what the quiet parts. I'm going to say my quiet part is, what is the goal here?
I agree.
Are we trying to get rid of these feelings? Are we trying to be able to live with the stress of politics? Like, I guess I'm curious when people talk about this, are we trying to eradicate them, the feelings? You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
It's so vague. I need explanation.
I do too. Well, it's also pathologizing to me. And I guess it's helpful at times to focus on what we can control. So I'm not saying that that's not sometimes a helpful mindset. Political stress is not something that came from inside of you. It's a systemic problem. And so, like, reduce your work goals, increase your self-care.
Here we go.
Acknowledge your limits and your feeling. Like, it's framing all of this as like, this is a problem inside of you,
right?
Rather than a problem that's coming from the outside all around you and like battering you constantly.
It is you. Systems theory isn't like a concept that's a metaphor. Systems are you because you are systems.
Yeah.
I think this idea that we can, like, again, like a switch, separate ourselves from the communities, from even who knows greater beyond that, it doesn't seem to work or be reality.
Right.
And I think that a lot of that, like, crappy ass advice just assumes that you are somehow separate. And that part is not just irritating, but in my opinion, potentially harmful and dangerous.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, am I being dramatic?
No, I think that's part of this, right? It's like, it is harmful to somebody to say, well, I know that you're afraid and angry and stressed, but that's probably all just like your problem. It's not because of anything that's happening outside of you. That is harmful.
Right.
Of course that's harmful.
And have you heard of the term political is personal? Personal is political. It kind of was coined during the feminist movements in the 70s. But the idea was that the political is personal because it affects your body. For example, this is coming out obviously before Roe v. Wade. And they're saying, wait a minute, politics affects what I can and can't do right within my body. And I think it goes even further. If you want to be real, the food that we eat or consume, the air that we breathe, that's going into your body, and it is affected by politics because there are laws and regulations and there are environmental racism.
Oh, yeah.
So anyhow, I just think it's laughable to think that we can separate ourselves from politics. Right. And I don't mean to sound pretentious, like we just happen to be systems thinkers, but like, it makes me sad because if we don't recognize how inextricably linked, then I think we can be doing ourselves a disservice to think that we can just shut it off with a switch.
Yeah, I agree.
And it also does others a disservice who can't shut it off with a switch. Like we talked about those residents of Springfield, Ohio. They don't get that opportunity right now. And so many other people don't. And so, yeah, I think those are really shitty pieces of advice. And does someone actually look at that and be like, oh, yay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to limit my social media.
I don't know. It really makes me think of, and I don't even remember who the person that posted some of those, like, that's an amalgamation of several posts. Like, and I'm sure they were, good-hearted or whatever, but good-hearted or whatever. But it just really makes me think of a corporation, sort of like a checking off a box of, okay, well, we talked to you about your mental health, so go back to work now.
Right.
That's
what it feels like.
I don't know. It just feels like somebody's like patronizing me.
Good on you. Hey? Yeah, you did such a great job. Don't worry. You'll get there one day. Soon you'll be just as good as the rest of us. So cute.
I know that lots of people have various levels of engagement with politics.
Mhm.
And some people naturally don't feel comfortable engaging, or that's not something that they've done ever in their whole life. Like you hear people saying, I just don't pay attention.
Yeah.
Or I can't watch any of that stuff. And so I don't want to criticize or belittle people's choices.
Right. But I think that that's like a very individualized situation.
Yeah.
Right. So just like anything, I would hope, especially as a clinician or mental health professional, we can't make like totally broad sweeping generalizations because there might be a very real, like legitimate reason that somebody is saying that.
Yeah.
You know, what if, I mean, this is just one example that's coming up, but like, what if they have actual PTSD, and looking at those things is really damaging to them because it triggers like old trauma and sends them into a crisis. Like, there are a lot of reasons why people might legitimately not be able to engage in that.
Absolutely.
And so I think, yes, that's another issue, is like swinging so far the other way where we're shaming people for their level of engagement just overall, and being like, well, why aren't you doing these things? Then you must like suck as a person, and you're not like a, you know, whatever. That's not helpful either.
Yeah.
So I think we really have to understand the nuance.
Right.
The nuance, as always.
And that's what it talked about. Like, there's no one size fits all. And a lot of the suggestions are so one-sized.
Absolutely.
And when we're talking about suggestions that we've come across, we're talking about ones that personally appeal to us, but then also that are just part of the literature. So take what you want.
Right.
Kind of situation, or see if this works for your personal set of circumstances. People that have been bullied or have been SA'd or have been in some part of abusive relationship that was obviously triggering and maintain and continues to be that way because of the bullying that's happening in that presentation of aggression and control and gaslighting that's happening a lot from our highest political leaders who we're supposed to trust. So yes, and I didn't see any of that being talked about on strategies.
No.
No. Right? Was there anything else that we came across that was annoying, or are those the top?
No, I think those were the tops. Are we ready for some advice that doesn't annoy
Yes.
me? Okay, here's some advice that doesn't annoy me. And I'm curious how you feel about it. Because like in this conversation, you know, some of the things that don't annoy me as much might still annoy you.
Right.
So, okay. This is actually really interesting. These are a couple pieces of advice. These weren't the only pieces, but from the EAP provider for Harvard University. Live your values. Okay, and so here's why I like that one. It has vibes of acceptance and commitment therapy, where even when things are difficult, if we can kind of focus in and stay grounded in our deeply held values, that can help us move forward. So it's not dismissing our pain or our hurt or our stress or our fear, but it's about acknowledging those feelings and still sitting and being in those values that we hold so deeply. So the next one that I liked, and I'll kind of combine it with a couple of other ones that were all in the same theme. So all in the same theme: seek community, partner with allies, right? Connect with friends who can engage in these conscious conversations. So have conversations with you in good faith. Those were all different pieces of advice I found in different places, but all seem to have a similar theme. And it kind of goes back to that research that said bonds between people who have the similar values and engaging those and like purposefully and intentionally seeking those out and connecting with people, not just like knowing that they're there, but intentionally being together, is linked with better physical and mental health in this realm. So I liked that one because it was a little bit more specific. There were a lot of good pieces of advice, including things like engaging in activism, like we've talked about, kind of aligning with the values piece. I think remembering that we can't solve this huge systemic problem all by ourselves, which I liked that piece of advice, like just reminding yourself that this is a huge problem which cannot be solved by a single person's efforts, is like immediate juxtaposition to me from the advice that annoyed me, right? So it's reminding yourself that you're in this system, that you have some power, but you don't have all the power. And so you can't put that pressure on yourself. I thought that was helpful. Okay, so I have some interesting ones. So it doesn't annoy me, it's just interesting. Instead of the like limits on your social media, like set a limit on your media consumption. Instead, it was like a little bit more specific. I found multiple sources saying that you should read your media rather than watching it. I thought was super interesting. And then they pointed back to a study that showed that people who watched footage of like a natural disaster, I think it was a hurricane or like maybe multiple, had more like PTSD symptoms than people who read about it or PTSD, like trauma reactions. So instead of just being like, oh, I'm setting a limit, kind of coming up with a plan for how you're going to engage, maybe reading things rather than constantly watching things, because speaking to the like stoking the fires of anger, like especially visual media, like they want to keep you engaged to make more money. So it's going to be more significant, like severe things that you're seeing. Whereas when you're reading it, your brain's absorbing that differently.
Yeah.
Right.
It's creating its own kind of visuals and narrative.
Right. Under that umbrella, there was advice to stop commenting.
Oh.
Which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, that was not one that
I
came
know.
up with.
Yeah. So technically it was stop scrolling and commenting, but I focused on the commenting, and the specifier they wrote was our mental health is more important than keeping up to date or winning an argument. Not just like set a limit, but really like, how am I going to understand how I'm engaging with all this stuff around me? How many times have I started reading comments of people arguing over and over again? And I'm like, why am I even reading this? I've been reading it for so long.
All right.
I don't even know how I started reading this.
Yeah.
Or like spending our time like commenting, like engaging, like is that helpful?
Right.
Is that doing anything for us? Probably not. And then having a doom scrolling plan.
Okay.
I thought that was good advice too.
Okay.
So include time frames of when you're going to doom scroll.
That's hard.
I know. But I just thought it was interesting, like we're acknowledging that we're going to do it rather than just being like, don't doom scroll, be like, okay, when am I going to do this?
Right.
Where am I going to do this? Right. And then
I like the where.
they also included joy scrolling.
Oh.
Like include joy scrolling.
Yeah.
As well.
I have certain accounts that are all animals.
Mm-hmm.
Just that.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite videos, could that be called joy scrolling?
Yes, it said sending memes, joyful pictures, gratitude, or just checking in with others.
Okay, gross. I don't do that. I look at animals and cats. I like cats knocking things off. I like cat taps.
Mm-hmm.
I like dogs being derps. Do people still say that? Yeah.
No.
So to me, that's joyful.
No, I think whatever you want it to be. Okay. Joy scrolling is, whatever you want it to be, as long as it's the opposite of doom scrolling.
I like that. Making space.
Yeah. So I think that made more sense to me. Like those ways of acknowledging like how we engage with social media and news and media than just being like, don't do it.
Yeah.
So
there's a few more recommendations around that.
What do you have?
Dr. I think Kevin Smith, who's a political scientist, they said that people who understand the democratic system or like understand more about how it operates tend to have less anxiety and stress around it.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the ideas were the more knowledge you have about how the system in America works, that actually people reported feeling more sense of being a little more in control, not in control, but like understanding it better. So he was talking about how a lot of not knowing how the system works can cause that like fear or dread.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting. And that's kind of attached to the media literacy part.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I've been noticing and I've read a lot about is the sources of media. So for example, when you're looking at highly polarized media sources that are either one end of the spectrum to another, and some aren't even on major news sources like just YouTube.
Yeah.
And I know because I consume some of those.
Yeah.
But that it is going to have more of those emotional manipulation techniques and to find more centered. And I found a really cool way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first time I've ever used a YouTuber's code for an ad they were doing.
Interesting. Okay.
I did it, but it was for Ground News. Are you familiar?
Mm-mm.
So what Ground News does, and we don't have a code because we're not that cool yet.
No, but if someone wants to give us a code, please, by all means, give us all the codes. It
does 3 different things that I love. Here's what I've loved about it. One, it tells you how balanced the news source you're
That's
looking
cool.
at. So
Ooh,
it'll
I like
say
it in
like
real
more
time.
red. Yes. Then it'll give you a subject and it'll show you how different outlets report on one particular subject. I have found this to be very helpful. And it's like I'm engaging with the news differently. I'm engaging with it in a way of like paying attention, not just to the content, but also like how it's being reported to me.
Mhm.
And I've really enjoyed that. And so I did
That's
see
cool.
that coming up a lot is if you want to look at what's going on, something that is a little less biased
Yeah.
is helpful for people. And in that same vein, if you want to stay up to date, but you get into that thing of like it's too much, find something that has like just the summary, like quick
Yeah.
news summaries.
Totally.
I do Apple News, but they
Mhm.
have like Apple News Daily or whatever it is that you listen to. And I thought that was really smart.
Yeah.
Like just get a 15-minute quick update. I thought that was good. To me, that's good advice. Does that annoy you or is that good advice?
No, I like that. It makes me think of I use the media bias chart a lot.
Mhm.
Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I like that idea. It's just that little bell curve that shows like how much of a like an editorial view the source takes and then also like how right or left leaning or central it might be. So that's helpful for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to me, those are very specific ways that if you do want to engage or you find yourself on social media and not even
Yeah.
having the choice, like you can kind of decide how you want to. I like that.
Yeah.
Because I'm a dork. No, I'm gonna rephrase that. Because intellectualization is my favorite defense mechanism.
Yay.
Like I like the idea of learning about the news. And
Yeah.
so I feel like I can understand it better, which makes me feel more in control, which helps me with my emotional reactions.
Sure.
And so that really helps because I'm someone that I don't think that I can just not know what's going on. Some people can get consumed
Mhm.
and overconsume.
Yeah.
And there's like this, you can do it with anything. It's
Sure.
not just politics or media. Like we can do it with anything.
My gosh, that happens to me all the time.
Right. But like sometimes I find
It's called
myself
having a special interest.
Yeah. I don't want to stop. Just like any other area that we overconsume that doesn't feel good to us, like what are our strategies around that? But
Mhm.
anyway, I really like that one because I don't feel it's an option not to for me.
So this last tip that I will say I've been doing with some of my clients is having a plan, a very specific plan for election day night and the next day. Cuz like you said, like, well, election day is going to be I'm going to have all of the channels turned on cuz I can't help it. But I shouldn't.
Well, but
it's
isn't
a
that
lot.
the time when we're allowed because it's almost like a sporting event?
A little-
We're
I-
allowed to
yeah.
live stream it for 24 hours.
I mean, I'm going to.
Yeah.
But I'm also working that day like on purpose.
Genius.
Like truly on purpose.
Guess what? It's my birthday.
What? Election
November
Day is your
5th.
birthday this year? Oh my
Yes.
God.
But I would say for the day of and then like weeks following because my
Yes.
sense is that it could be like it has been in many election cycles past.
Right. Yeah. And
is
then
the
so
clear
we have
one.
expanded that in
Yeah.
some conversations. Like
Yeah.
might not be just the next day. It might be the next few weeks. Like, what are we going to do? And sometimes it is just kind of as simple as, well, I'm going to plan to watch it. And here's what I'm going to do while I watch it. What do I do if this is how the election goes? Versus what do I do if that's how the election goes? And in some conversations, it has been, I have my passport ready. It can be something like that, or it could be something very simple, like who are your sport people? Where are you going to go? Are you going to be with people? Are you going to be by yourself? Are you going to be at your house? Are you going to be at someone else's house? Should you schedule a therapy session the next day? I mean, there's so many things, but just like having a plan for that time,
Right.
I think is my tip that I would add in and that I am going to definitely do for myself. What do you think?
Well, it's just different for everyone. You're right.
Mhm.
I think it's really smart. And I think it's also smart for therapists, if there's any therapists listening, to also have a plan.
Oh, for sure.
Because when we're supporting people with situations that we're directly going through, it is a whole nother thing. And we're going to get into that. But there was one other suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very specific. So, take it or leave it if this works for you, but humor.
Oh, yeah.
So one of them was like, one of my coping skills is watching humorous news, like the,
like the
Stephen
Daily
Colbert,
Show.
the
Yeah,
Daily Show,
I love
or
those
John.
kinds of things
Like
too.
you're still getting actual information, but it's funny. And then other ways of like bringing humor in could be what we've done is, and what I'm obsessed with is like making games out of things, like doing bingo cards. That's just something I'm probably going to do to lessen the very real.
Yeah.
I don't just say lessen, but to take, and I feel like comedy and humor and other tactics have been used to do that over centuries.
Totally.
By
Yeah.
humans, because it's as real shit. And by all means, not to belittle it, but also to say this is real and it's too much. So let's make a joke from it. You brought this up earlier, but we didn't talk about it as far as a strategy. But the disengagement, or the idea of like totally trying to not feel something, from everything I read, was actually not helpful.
Yeah.
And so, to the annoying thing of accept your feelings, I think something that's a little bit more effective, or that could be more practical, would be to, I don't want to be sounding too woo-woo or a therapist,
You
but
just
like,
can, just do
I'm
it.
just going to do it. The idea that this is scary. We should be scared. It makes sense. I'm angry, or this is so uncomfortable. I'm scared. I have dissonance, whatever it is. Like, those are typically things that we want to like not feel or
Right.
experience. So we try to do all these things to not feel or experience in them. But the idea is if we can recognize that it is part of the process, and that maybe things that we do to distract ourselves or to completely disengage isn't as helpful because it's still there inside your body.
Talking about the gifts of uncertainty, the courage to feel what you feel in the present moment. As you become present to your world, then you feel what you're carrying. That usually, if you're being rushed and hurried out of your minds, you don't bother paying. You try to pave it over, block it down, shut it down, turn away, turn it off. But try as we might, it comes up again. The grief, the outrage, the raw fear. What in God's name are we doing to our world and to each other? And you now are not going to fall for the ploy of the industrial growth society to pathologize that pain. Hear me? Don't let people, therapists or well-meaning friends, try to explain it away in terms of your personal biography or that time of month. It is a measure of your evolution, it is a measure of your humanity. It is a measure of your nobility that you have a heart, mind big enough to see and empathize with the outrage being inflicted on our world and all our relations.
I'm just like really good at dissociating. I'm so good at it.
Well, and sometimes it's necessary.
Yeah.
As we know.
Yeah.
Like distraction techniques in therapy, sometimes that's a very important technique to distract yourself or to completely disengage.
Yeah.
Your body does that on purpose when it's too much.
Right.
So I think when people are like, lean into your feelings and embrace the difficult feelings. Yes. When we're at like a level 0 to 5, maybe.
Right.
5 to 10, honey,
Bring out the wine.
disassociate.
Just kidding.
Yes. Bring it out. Whatever.
Don't
it
take
is.
that as like actual clinical advice.
Yeah. Hey,
what?
One size fits all, but I absolutely. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm thinking it's a little bit of both, but the idea of when it becomes too much, your body 100% naturally disengages. It's too much.
Yeah, my body's really good at that.
Right.
I hope that those listening, that those tips maybe were helpful and not annoying. But we would love to hear from you. Were those tips annoying in ways that we didn't find? And what do you think about this? Because obviously we've talked about this forever.
Right. Can't stop.
Cannot stop. And so I'm sure people have more thoughts to add to the conversation. So comment and let us know what you think.
Please.
Also, if you enjoyed listening to us unpack all of this, make sure you like hit the like button and that subscribe button.
Please.
All the things so that you can be well aware the next time one of these pops up for you.
Editing, Jennifer and Laurel here. After recording almost 3 hours of our mental health and politics podcast, we decided to break it up into 2.
Yes, we had to, because there's no way anyone wanted to listen to that amount of our chattering in a straight, straight.
Yeah,
we had to break it up a little bit.
We had to break it up a little bit, and we covered so much. So if you were hearing this, you were nearing the end of part 1, which we talked a lot about the personal side of mental health and politics. And we're moving on to talking about politics in the therapy space,
which was my favorite, I think. But you can decide for yourself if you like part 1 or 2 better.
I love that.
Let us know.
See you soon.
Bye. Like and subscribe. Okay, see ya.